Great Britain says bye-bye. Since January 1st, the United Kingdom is no longer part of the European single market, and Brexit is over. This is already having an impact on trade and SMEs, and I'm going to give you a small analysis of the current situation. By the way, you should stay tuned until the end if you don't want to miss anything interesting. And if you don't want to miss anything at all, just subscribe to my channel and click the little bell. Brexit has become quiet among the German public, for example. After the British had left the European Union, now 2 months ago or 2.5 months ago, they had left the European Union for months now. The media and society are currently turning their attention to other issues. But the calm is deceptive. Brexit took place on January 31st, 2020, and it is already affecting our economy. It is therefore worth taking a look at the current state of affairs. Up front, I've, as should be clear now, never been and still am not a friend of Brexit. I support the European idea and would have been happy if the British had remained part of the European Union. Despite all the lies that time, the situation changed with the behavior now. But the decision has been made and everyone has to live with the consequences. Who really benefits in the end is still somewhere in the stars. But one thing is already clear. The path to an agreement and good cooperation is extremely complex and difficult. And it must be clear, membership benefits are membership benefits and not for third countries. For some time now, several task forces have been trying to reach agreements. Be it the Federation of German Industries or the EU itself. The amount of topics that have to be negotiated and shaped is huge. From services and digital commerce to intellectual property and aviation to law enforcement or even the wine trade. So, the trade between Great Britain and the EU does not come to a complete standstill. The Provisional Trade and Cooperation Agreement has been in effect since January 1st. To outline the complexity of the whole subject, it is worth taking a look at this document, which is, with its almost 1,500 pages, is anything but easy to read. Example is good traffic. This topic takes up over 60 pages in the agreement, and the exemptions for services even 100 pages. If you are willing to work your way through there, you can, for example, read how to deal with plants and their possible pests, that ironing goods does not mean that they are considered a product of origin of one of the contracting parties, how to use customs brokers, or how to deal with animals, and all those things that you really can cross a line there. Unfortunately, it's currently becoming apparent that even customs officials reach their limits when reading the trade agreement. Despite or perhaps because of the complex document, there are ever greater delays in retail. As reported by the German Tagesschau, for example, according to a survey by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, 60% of the 350 supply chain managers surveyed said that the movement of goods now takes longer than at the beginning of the year. And the reason is the long processing time at customs. New regulations, such as the obligation to register for import sales tax, also counteract rapid processing. New in case of Britain, but they were old in the other ways. After all, the trade agreement calls for international bodies to work together. A whole chapter is devoted to the subject of customs and trade facilitation. The currently very high bureaucratic effort is a feat of strength, especially for SMEs. If trading becomes more and more expensive and complex, it will no longer be worthwhile for many companies. After all, the trade agreement calls for international bodies to work together, as I said. And the working together part is something, well, how do I phrase that one? That it doesn't look at if it's going smoothly at the moment. And that in the end might mean that small and medium-sized companies will not take part in that anymore. And one thing, once more for our whiskey friends, the Village 2021 has reached its limits due to Brexit. Unclear import regulations, very long and indefinite delivery times, and high customs fees cause bottlenecks in whiskey deliveries from the UK to the EU. After we got used to the cancellation of the whiskey fairs last year due to the corona pandemic, this spring there is a new reason for a cancellation. The Village 2021 will not take place as planned in the spring of 2021 at the Nuremberg Exhibition Center. Due to Brexit, there are difficulties with whiskey deliveries, and these have not yet been resolved. But there's positive news. There will be the Village Airport Edition 2021 this year on June 12th and 13th. The Nuremberg Whiskey Fair, the Village, as I said, will not take place as planned in the spring, but they found another way. The reason for the rejection is the difficulties with whiskey deliveries that resulted from Brexit and have not yet been resolved. And I can't repeat that often enough. There's a lot still to be resolved. However, the waiting time until the next Nuremberg Whiskey Fair in spring will be shortened by the Village Airport Edition. It will take place at Albrecht Dürer Airport in Nuremberg. But unclear import regulations, very long and indefinite delivery times, and high customs fees are still a trouble and will thwart the whiskey trade fair, the Village 2021. The export of whiskey from the world's most important whiskey region has been really slowed down by Brexit. Dealers and importers do not currently know whether they will get the whiskey from Great Britain that they order by the planned date of the original Village in May. Even if the corona pandemic was no issue anymore, that would be the big issue then. It is also unclear whether the big names in the scene, international whiskey distillers and industry experts, will be able to travel to Village this year. That in turn depends on the travel regulation and quarantine rules. Whiskey Fair project manager Stefan Dovan faced numerous hurdles during the preparations for the Village 2021. In addition to the problem that there are only few signals from politics and the economy, the whiskey scene has had great difficulties with Brexit now. Overall, there are too many imponderables on the way to Village 2021. Visitors associate the Village with something special, with a very special event where visitors can find their new favorite from over 2,000 whiskies on offer and where the big names of the scene meet in person. Since that is not possible this year, we have decided not to hold the Village 2021 as planned, he said. And they announced then that to shorten the time until the Village 2022, they plan an airport edition, as I said, at the Albrecht Dürer Airport in Nuremberg. And it's offering then a small but fine offer for whiskey connoisseurs and lovers on June 12th and 13th. The airport edition does not present the same offer as our visitors from the Village are used to, they say. We expect 25 exhibitors to present their whiskies in a special atmosphere. The event location offers a direct view of the runway and is therefore the perfect location with Wanderlust guarantee to discover international whiskies. At the same time, the Village Airport Edition is one of the few opportunities to explore the whiskies that have already been imported live this year and to complete the local whiskey collection, says Stefan Dovan. It's remarkable how many small areas are involved. But they will have the airport thingy, and that's at least a little thing. It all starts with an exclusive whiskey dinner on June 11th in the Mövenpick restaurant at the airport. All visitors who have already bought a ticket for the pre-opening of the Village 2021 have a right of first refusal for the limited tickets, both for the airport edition in June 2021 and for the next whiskey fair, the Village, which will again take place in spring 2022 in the Nuremberg Exhibition Center than where it usually is. All ticket holders, I think none of my viewers is one, but maybe will get direct contact from them. And the next whiskey fair, the Village, will celebrate its 10th anniversary then next year. Access to the Whisky Fair and the village airport is only permitted from the age of 18, of course. And I really should go there one day. And another thing, is Brexit driving Gibraltar into Europe's arms? We haven't heard about Gibraltar for some time now. The territory at the tip of Spain will remain British on paper, but in practice, Brexit has brought it closer to the EU than ever before. Of course, according to legend, Gibraltar will stay British as long as the Barbary apes remain in residence. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, ever on the lookout for a good symbol, boosted their numbers during World War II to make sure of the territory's survival. By that measure, its identity is safe. Despite early fears in British tabloids that the animals might succumb to COVID-19, all 300 or so are fine and still there. But the next 6 months are likely to see much monkeying around with the status of Gibraltar, also known as the Rock, for its imposing mountain promontory, which will say more about Britain's changing role in the world than the primate's continued presence. Brexit has provided a fresh opportunity for outbursts of angst about who really has the right to the Rock, and every little excuse is needed to provoke nationalist neuralgia in both Spain and the United Kingdom. The territory on the southern edge of Spain is an evergreen, potent symbol of British power and pride, and its status periodically provokes British tabloids to a frenzy. There have even been suggestions in the past by aficionados of the Falklands conflict that the Royal Navy should sail in, just to make a point. It was, after all, British and Dutch Marines, backed by 15,000 cannons, who captured it in the first place in 1704, having failed to take Barcelona and thinking Cadiz too tough a nut to crack. In one sense, the tabloids need not worry despite the Brexit-fueled opportunity for a refreshed row with the Spanish government. The UK flag will continue to flutter over the 2.5 square miles of limestone outcropping at the tip of Spain. The Spanish have explicitly taken the issue of sovereignty off the table in the new negotiations made necessary by the UK's departure from the European Union, to the dismay of some in Spain. Indeed, opposition parties like the far-right Vox call it a betrayal. But to see this through the lens of much of the British press and many politicians is a mistake. While they focus on their fundamental preference for a past world where competition is exclusively between sovereign nations like the UK and Spain, they fail to notice the opportunity handed to the supranational institution they so much dislike. Everything will change, and only one great power will hugely increase its influence in this tiny territory without deploying a single navy, let alone firing any cannons. That power is the European Union. The fallout from Brexit is likely to diminish the UK's sway in its sole remaining possession in the heart of Europe. It is unlikely that Prime Minister Boris Johnson will ever concede that Gibraltar is written on his heart, as Queen Mary claimed the lost territory of Calais would be engraved on hers. But the coming negotiations are unlikely to burnish the claims of Britain as an ever-increasing global power. That's because any New Deal will diminish the UK's practical role and strengthen that of the EU. Gibraltar was just one of the prizes awarded to Great Britain in 1713 in the Treaty of Utrecht, a sprawling, multifaceted effort to tie up loose ends after the long years of the War of the Spanish Succession. It stated that the town, castle and fortifications were to be held and enjoyed forever without any exception or impediment whatsoever by the British. The treaty was a sign of a shifting balance of power, and that the new nation had increased its clout on the world stage. The British also won chunks of Canada of the French and took from the Spanish the asiento, a monopoly on selling black slaves to the Spanish colonies of the Americas. The celebrated historian G.M. Trevelyan wrote that the treaty marked a significant change in the world, solidifying the maritime, commercial, and financial supremacy of Great Britain. It is also set in stone the British strategy of the balance of powers, where by careful manipulation from across the Channel, no one power was allowed to dominate the continent. No wonder Gibraltar has become such a symbol of British might. A new treaty should be signed before the summer is out, and that may also mark a significant landmark in Britain's history as a diminished power in Europe with no greater global reach than before. While the UK settled a Brexit deal on Christmas Eve, it took until New Year's Eve for Spain, the UK and Gibraltar to come to an agreement, after what Gibraltar's Chief Minister Fabian Picardo described to a House of Lords committee in January as the most hectic, most difficult, intensely political negotiations he has ever known. If implemented, it would mean getting rid of the existing physical border between Spain and Gibraltar, making life easier for the 10,000 workers who cross daily and who currently must face work permit checks at the barrier every time. This would be a huge symbolic shift. As trade barriers are going up between the UK and the EU, the Gibraltar Agreement is a significant move in the opposite direction. While it is just a so-called framework agreement, the next step is for the European Commission to establish a mandate to negotiate a new treaty between the EU and the UK. The Treaty of Brussels, or whatever is eventually called, won't replace the Treaty of Utrecht, but it will dim rather than extinguish the UK's sovereign role. Gibraltar has long had a rather odd status. It is the only British overseas territory that was a member of the EU, joining the European bloc with the UK. In 1972, and it was even considered part of southwest England for the purposes of European elections. Before Brexit, unlike the UK, it wasn't a member of the EU Customs Union or the Common Agricultural Policy, but like Britain, it didn't take part in one of the EU's most important policies, the border-free Schengen area. Because Gibraltar was part of neither the border between the Rock and Spain, or the fence as it is known locally, is policed by both the Spanish Civil Guard and Her Majesty's Customs and Excise. Traveling into Gibraltar by sea or air, checks are at the moment carried out by British Customs and Gibraltar's own border agency, wearing uniforms like those of British police officers. This is likely to change radically. The plan is that Gibraltar's port and airport become the new frontier of Schengen, the EU's passport-free area, replacing the existing land border. Those arriving from the UK will have their documents checked. Those coming from one of the 22 Schengen area countries that are also EU members won't. Rubbing in the point, the people checking the documents of British visitors will be members of the EU's border guard, Frontex. There's a fight brewing over whether Gibraltar will become a part of Schengen or be merely connected to it, but the direction of travel is clear enough. You would have thought that checks of their beloved blue passports in a British territory would be enough to give Brexiteers apoplexy, but it doesn't end there. While the UK has now left the customs union, the plan is that Gibraltar will join it for the very first time. The EU is likely to insist on extending its value-added tax regime and its trade policies and regulations to the Rock. Gibraltar's chief minister points out the irony that the plan is for the Rock to have a closer relationship with the EU than it ever did during the 48 years when it and the UK were members of the club. In practical terms, none of this will trouble the average British citizen much or give diplomats sleepless nights. Any eventual agreement will be a compromise with probable tangible benefits to the Gibraltarians and Spanish, on both sides of the newly frictionless border. But for a long time now, the ROC hasn't been about hard power and practical advantage. It is a totem. This is the price of Brexit. The British hold on to their pride of possession at the price of the European Union extending the reach of one of its most precious policies, the freedom of movement within its borders. The only other place under British rule to share a land border with an EU country is, of course, Northern Ireland, where history makes the issue of borders even more fraught. It is leaving the customs union, while the neighboring EU member, Ireland, naturally stays in. Neither have ever been part of Schengen, by the way. With a great fear that a hard border with custom checks and other stuff like that could lead to the political violence, the solution, currently causing a huge row, is the awkward notion of customs checks for cargo crossing the Irish Sea. In other words, between one part of the UK and another. The big difference is that Gibraltar's residents do at least seem to share a common vision. While almost 96% voted to remain in the EU in the 2016 Brexit vote, in a 2002 referendum, 99% also voted to stay exclusively British. The duality of what is on offer for the ROC would clearly divide people in Northern Ireland by reinforcing its separateness from Great Britain and underscoring its closeness to Ireland. With Brexit, the UK is not only abandoning its internal influence over the one power that does make policy for most of the continent, but it is also now likely to grant that power even more say in its one remaining European territory. It's not exactly the equivalent of the United States invading Grenada. When US President Ronald Reagan totally ignored the UK's role, the Queen was and remains head of state of the Caribbean island, but it would scarcely lead a contemporary Trevelyan to suggest the new policy is re-establishing the supremacy of Great Britain. There is a final warning from history. The Treaty of Utrecht was only partially agreed in 1713. It took another 2 years to be completed. Once again, the clock is ticking, but don't expect this to be over by the June deadline. The EU's former chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, said it will be sensitive and difficult. And don't expect a future Trevelyan to suggest it cements the maritime, commercial and financial supremacy of Great Britain in the post-Brexit world. As the Treaty of Utrecht was discussed in the Netherlands, a French diplomat told one of his Dutch hosts rather viciously that the negotiations would be held de vous, chez vous, sans vous, about you, on your turf, without you. Although we don't know where the new treaty will be signed or what it will be called, much of the same could be said now of the government in London. Deals will be signed about British territories without much say from British officials. It is a sign of the times that, reassured that UK sovereignty is still intact, the people and politicians of the ROC seem content to snuggle closer under the EU's capacious, slightly tattered wings. And it's getting more and more absurd with Brexit now. If you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel. Auf Wiedersehen.